Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So, my guest today, he's known as an e-commerce and a SaaS growth expert. He's helped thousands of tech companies grow to millions of dollars in revenue using his product. In fact, quite extraordinary, $4 billion in revenue for his clients. It's a company that I've known about for years. Over 9.7 million products are actually sold. It's safe to say that this particular gentleman, he's changed the game, disrupted the industry. It'll be interesting to see where he thinks the industry is going to go and how we can compete today, given all the different changes economically, technologically, and the whole deal. So, without further ado, welcome to the show, Justin Smith, CEO of SamCart.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro. That's quite flattering. Appreciate it.
No worries. We have a lot of guests that are on the show that many of them have just started and co-founded a business. But I noticed that you actually moved up the ladder. You've been with SamCart now for almost 7 years. You started with head of product, then you moved to COO, and then eventually CEO. However, you founded other businesses as well. You were the co-founder of a consulting business, and you were a founder of a company called Procurely. So why did you take a different route when it came to SamCart? Why did you go from founding prior businesses to then jumping in as head of product and then moving your way up?
Yeah. So my history of SamCart was pretty unique. The two founders of SamCart are two brothers. They were Division One baseball players. They got out of college, decided that they wanted to help build digital content back before the word creator even existed. And so this was in 2007, 2008. And they created this great baseball product, and they were selling it to coaches and parents and little league players that wanted to learn how to do all kinds of amazing stuff in baseball and teach better baseball. And at the time, they were really running into a huge problem with their tech stack. So if you think back 10, 15 years ago, selling physical products a lot was hard, but at least you had the Shopify's and some of the earlier technologies. But selling digital products was near impossible. You had to basically have a custom dev do all the custom workflows for your jobs. I've worked with very little companies, founded small companies, all the way up to publicly traded companies and everywhere in between. And one of the times where I just recently sold one of my companies and had that golden handcuff period where I was trying to figure out what to do. I had known Brian from college. I got connected with Brian, his brother, and I saw that they were this genius sort of, as we now know, creator who can create great content and everyone wants to listen to them. They had this great need for this product, but they didn't really know how to convert that to a SaaS product. Their background wasn't in building software. And so that's where I came in, joined them early on. And for me personally, titles are silly at small companies. When we're a 15-person company figuring it out, like I didn't really care what my title was at any given time. We're all relatively low ego people. But I think joining them at that sort of stage where they've built, at the time they were 3 to 5 million in revenue, mostly through internet, digital products and stuff, and then converting that business over to SaaS. And we've now scaled that up to over $30 million. And that's where my journey with SamCart has progressed. Not just SamCart, but most of the places I've worked have been for SMB SaaS companies. So I worked for a live chat company that does live chat software that was used by all types of customers. At SamCart, we have customers that go up into the hundreds of millions of dollars in processing, but most of our customers are just your average $1,000 a month to $40,000 a month customers that are either a side hustle or just moving out of side hustle territory. And I think one of the reasons why, going back from one of your points earlier, is I love that I get the perspective of not only myself, an entrepreneur, growing a business and what that takes and what I need to do and learning those lessons, but I get to watch. I mean, right now we have about almost 100,000 customers. So I'm watching through data, through even talking to customers, like, why are people successful? Oh, this type of group is successful. Oh, these people are not. It's been really super interesting to get to see that.
Let's piggyback on that. You said you're watching this group of people and this group is successful and this group isn't. What commonalities have you found among those that are most successful versus those who are not?
There's 3 pieces to the recipe that I know someone will they're guaranteed to drive some success. If they have these 3 pieces, then they will be able to drive some amount of revenue. The first one is actually just sort of grit. And I know it sounds silly. I can tell the person that's like on their 5th side hustle idea, they're going to do it for a month or 2 and then they're going to move on. Something they're passionate about, they're doing it to make money. And so I think the first thing is just persistence. If there's someone that's willing to do the same thing long enough, they will be somewhat successful. The second piece of that is what's interesting about creators and the types of customers that we have on the digital side, they're really great at generating content, but that's content that you want viral TikTok videos or like emails or ads or whatever their specialty is. They're really great at that. But what they really struggle with is like sales conversion content. It's actually two very different arts, right? Creating funny viral content that makes people want to watch your content is much different than, okay, I now have your attention and I want you to be convinced to buy this specific thing. The story I like to give is we had the number one violinist in the world. He was like the Yo-Yo Ma of the violin, and like he was the person that was known as the best at the time. And he came to us and he said, I have an audience, but I don't have a product. And so they came in and they made like $7,000 in their first like real attempt at selling a product. And it's just because they were so good at a concept or an idea didn't mean that that could translate into building a product that someone wanted to buy and then convincing them to buy. So I think the second piece of that puzzle, and before I get to the third, actually, I will say, I do think this is an area that we're seeing technology change from an AI perspective, because we are seeing a lot of these customers start go and leverage these ChatGPT like tools or the many other ones that are out there. They say, okay, I know how to teach someone how to play the violin. I've built this product and it's a giant ebook that walks them through all the steps, or it's a video course and walks them through the steps. And then they can leverage something like ChatGPT to say, okay, like build my sales page for me, or how do I build a paragraph that convinces someone to buy this thing? And it actually works. We had a cohort, we actually did a test at SamCart. We took 1,500 people and we just put them through our normal onboarding workflow to get started, which admittedly is a little lackluster. It's just sort of like, here's a software product, go use it. And about 3 to 5% of the average person starting up with our software would go to make a sale. And we've seen that for 7 years now. So like of the mass market coming in, signing up, they don't have a product yet, they don't have an audience, they're just a newbie that wants to get started and grow a business. They're going to, probably about 3% of them will be successful. We took that same type of persona and cohort and we did another 1,500 people. And instead of giving them the generic onboarding, we said, look, before you onboard, take these prompts and go to ChatGPT and answer the survey. And they would go in there and they would answer the survey, and then we converted that survey into their landing page. And something like 16% of them went on to go make sales. It showed like there was the same exact persona, the same type of person. They didn't have an audience, they didn't have a product. They were the same like grit, gut, like person, but they just, more of them were able to convert with that technology. And we found that to be super interesting.
So more people had landing pages, therefore more people converted versus the other people maybe dragged their feet or didn't actually get things done. Or
yes, I'm sure there were some people who, because it was easier to move forward, but I think majority of it was, it just takes compelling copy, offers, messaging to get someone to want to buy something. I've seen the pages that these folks would create, and it's just not, I mean, if I just went to a cold audience that doesn't know me and I don't have an audience, and just could try to convince them to buy something from me with a page that is like nonsensical or doesn't really describe my product, they're not going to convert. But then the last thing I think goes back to what I said before, which is the ability to build some sort of audience. And I think people mistake that as a social media audience. Like, it doesn't just have to be social. Like, we have customers that are all local. Like, we have a customer in Florida who he only sells like around the neighborhood. Now, that's not what we're meant for, but like his audience is his ability to go door to door and get a community around people he knows. Other people might use social media ads. Other people might use newsletter. There's lots of ways to build an audience. But if you can't build some sort of warm audience, it's really tough.
Bill Gates actually talked about this back in the late 90s. He said the future of companies, all companies, will be media companies, because we're all going to have to put together some sort of content in order to stay relevant. And one of the things that we found is that consumption drives conversion. So the more content someone consumes, ultimately, the shorter the sales cycle, which is interesting because I've had many conversations with a number of well-recognized experts and gurus and whatnot around the world. And many of them have called me and said, what do we do now? Because the strategies that we used prior, they're not working right now. And it's taking longer and longer and longer for people to buy. You have any tips for shortening the sales cycle? And it came down to the one thing that we happened to find almost by accident, and it was that consumption drives conversion. The more content somebody consumes, whether that's a social media video, whether they're reading a LinkedIn post, whether they just see your ad over and over again. But if we look at the function of marketing, the function of marketing is broken into 3 phases. It's how you create demand, capture demand, and nurture demand. And so when you look at it that way as the function of marketing, create, capture, and nurture demand, you can see why content is such an important piece, because content helps to create demand. Then content also helps to capture that demand and also helps to nurture demand. It's one of the most effective strategies that any marketer can do is put out content, but not just any content, because then the problem with ChatGPT is people are like, oh, write me an article on blah, 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 and everybody does it. It's being able to offer that new and fresh perspective that gets your prospective clients to go back on their heels, look up at the ceiling and go, whoa, that changes everything.
Aligning with what you just said, there used to be three ways you could market. There's like the impulse buy, there's like the short form content, the short term content, and then the long term content. And I think we've just entered into a world where we've eradicated the short term content. To your point, we see that the ones that are building relationships, how the customers consume content over time, are definitely making sales and building strong relationships. That's preferred. That's the best. If you think back 10 years ago, you could throw up literally the strategy that everyone was using, and it was like very simple, was you throw up some sort of freebie, or you throw up a landing page, or you give some sort of little bit of content out. They give you your email address, and in exchange for a week, you're going to hammer them with emails and try to provide them a short piece of content and then make the sale at that moment. We're seeing that strategy go away. It's really just impulse buys and long form content. And I think
Yep.
where our customers are coming to us for is that they're saying, look, we need, from a software perspective, one of the things that we've actually shifted and changed in our sort of product strategy over time is we used to support that short form content a lot more, right? We wanted to be able to provide that. Now, all of our customers are saying, I want checkout to be where our products are being discovered. I want the impulse buy. And if I can't capture the impulse buy, then I'll go for the long tail content game. And I've got a strategy for that. I'm executing on that, and we'll get the checkout eventually. But I want someone scrolling on Instagram that sees that product to be able, like, I don't want them to go to like a full product page anymore where they're seeing like reviews and logos and big descriptors and stuff. They're like, I want to be able to like get that impulse purchase right away. And I think it's definitely something that we've seen, and especially with the world of AI allowing for content to be just like mass produced. Even more, I like to equate to like the internet with the blogs. If you think about blogging over the last 20 years, it was like blogging was like super personal and specialized. Then it became super commercialized, but not oversaturated. And then it just became so oversaturated. They were just like, blogging is like, unless it's strategic, is like just filling the internet. We're only going to see that on steroids in terms of the information that's being consumed.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because when we look at the buyer's journey, and so the client might look at that as an impulse buy. Somebody's coming in, boom, they buy. But behind the scenes, my hallucination is that they've actually had a very extensive review process, checking out a whole bunch of different bits of information. And it's then they're able to make a decision that go, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to buy this, because they've already done a lot of that work. That's why we used to see the traditional marketing funnel kind of looking like a regular funnel. I was in a boardroom not too long ago, and I asked everyone in the boardroom, when do you think that was created? I think the earliest somebody said was 1970 as their guess on when that was created. I was like, would you be surprised to learn that that was actually first created in the late 1800s and then further refined in, it was like 1924. And they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, but the buying habits have changed. Can we all agree? But all the marketers and the gurus on the planet are still using that same buyer's pyramid. But the reality is that Google actually gave us a secret shortly after 2020 when they drilled down and they go, you know what? We have all the data to show how buyers buy. And what we found is that they go through this cycle of exploration and evaluation until they make a buying decision. And so when we look at it like that, it changes the perspective on how we have to show up in order to convert. In fact, I look at SamCart. You mentioned it earlier. When you guys first came on the scenes, you were very much disruptors. The buying cycles were much shorter. People, they knew who you guys were, but you had such huge share of voice because you guys were the leaders in so many different categories. And now we have Shopify and WooCommerce and ThriveCard and all these. Then you've got ClickFunnels, which kind of is already built in, and all these other ones, yet you're still doing over $30 million in revenue. So what have you done and how have you adapted to Buyer? And what have you seen over the course of the years since you first started with SamCart to now?
I think when I first started SamCart, Brian said to me, and this was at a time where we were largely servicing a more sophisticated audience. Like most of our sellers were larger. And he said to me, the number one thing that matters for us right now, our core thesis is uptime. And I doubted that for many years. I said, no one's actually using us because of that. And I think what I've come to realize is that there are a lot of things, there are a lot of changes in the market, but as long as we can fulfill a core promise and a core need, then we'll be fine. And I think that what that means is we were very fortunate in the beginning that we focused on larger customers. They did about $3 million or greater in GMV a year. So like uptime, reliability, being able to just like work and not have like a bunch of problems was the cornerstone of what we had to build because these were relatively large brands. We didn't start with the small brands and work our way up. And so I think we've just always carried that throughout. I think one of the things that I would say in retrospect, I would say we did a pretty poor job of changing with the market fast enough. If one of my big regrets as CEO is thinking about we're probably about a year to 18 months behind on where we should have been with the change in everything we just talked about from a product perspective. We spent a lot of time focused on thinking that we need to be more like an all-in-one solution. We should be providing more features outside of checkout because we're moving to a world in which everybody just wants the simplistic one place to do everything for their business. And I think to some extent that's true, but what we're starting to now see is like really people just want a very specialized vertical solution that does exactly what they need and actually provides a meaningful result for their business. And we're seeing a lot more tolerance for being able to have multiple tech stacks. If you look at the creator, for example, they have probably 17, and I'm not exaggerating, 17 different tools to manage your business.
So what could you have done to catch that earlier? If you're talking to the CEOs that are listening to this podcast right now, you're saying, man, I wish we caught it earlier. What advice are you going to give to the CEOs that are listening now that are like, I don't want that to happen to me?
There's two things that in looking back, I think I would change. The first one is, it's just the classic dilemma. We raised a bunch of capital and part of our motivation, basically we were able to shift away from the like completely bootstrap, listen to customers, iterate the products completely based on what we're seeing in the reality of the market and what we're seeing in the space to being able to be a little bit more experimental, have a little bit more of our own vision. And I think that, I don't want to say chasing the growth, but making sure that we were now factoring in a lot of other factors beyond just what customers are saying and how we're going to make that dollar. The second thing is we actually ran into what I would call like a metric trap. It's hard to describe. I'll just describe it. And I don't know how to like solve this problem, or I don't know how to for others to look in their own organizations. But if this sounds like something that's happening in your company, you should definitely pay attention to it. So when we were bootstrapped and when we were really like hustling, there's only two things that drove the business: how much money was in the bank and what was happening around that to make sure that more money was coming than we were spending. And that was just it. Every single month, every single day, we were looking at that equation. And of course, as we raised more capital and we grew and scaled and the scale of what we were doing was a little bit larger, what I noticed was the way we would work is we create these like broad initiatives for the company. So we'd say, okay, we want to reduce churn by 1% this quarter. That's like the big mandate across all the teams. And then the teams would meet and they would say, okay, we're going to create these projects. And these are the 3 projects that we're going to do to achieve that goal. And one of the things that we thought we were being really smart on was we were like, we have to have just 3 goals rolling up to the North Star vision. And we're all going to focus. And we're going to be, really focused on what we're doing. But the problem that we wound up doing is that those projects, people wound up creating metrics that became these metrics that just validated that the projects were getting done and not necessarily that we're rolling up to the core goal. So I'll give you a specific. We had a team that was an onboarding team, a product onboarding team. Their job was to get to reduce churn, and their vision for reducing churn is making sure that in your first 14 days, 7 days, you got into the product, you used the product, and you're able to really get going with the product in a better fashion. So their goal was they're going to increase from 62% the number of customers that create their first product in the first day. They want that to be 70. So every quarter or every month, they were like, yeah, we got 2% more, 2% more, 2% more. 4 to 6 months later, they've achieved their goal. Everyone's happy, but we look at the ultimate goal and it didn't touch churn whatsoever because that magic moment wasn't correct. It's a different magic moment that they weren't aware of. Going back to your original question, I think to avoid maybe like missing out on some of those changes, I think look at your metrics and understand, is that metric just maybe supporting an internal thesis or some team member's project getting done? Or is it actually tied to what's happening in the market or what's happening with growth or what's happening with a core goal? And I think we just let those go too long. Right now we're like every month you can experiment, you can run your own metrics, but if that doesn't move that needle, we scrap that project and we move on. I think we were just letting those things go too long because we were sort of falsely assumed that these vanity metrics were the right thing.
Now, you talked about how you had almost like wished you did something different or you had different insights. But now let's fast forward into the future. So, where do you think the buyer is moving to in the future? And, and what time horizon are you looking at? Are you looking at 12 months? You're looking at 5 years? Like, where do you think things are moving?
I think two things are going to happen. I think creators are going to become more like curators.
Hmm.
So, in a world where information is just abundant and probably generated by bots and AI and different sources, there needs to be some level of curation. You might actually have started to see this. If you go on like TikTok or Instagram, there's actually a really popular category of creator that's coming up now that's like, these are just people like trying restaurants, or there's a famous creator who just gets sent restaurant products and they just eat it and they just talk about it online. And I think that type of creator is going to be more of what you see in terms of there's so much content out there. It goes beyond just how do I go buy a tent? It's like, well, I need someone to curate all of this content for me and distill it down to like the real tactile. I've used this tent. Here's what I think. I think that will continue to sort of improve over time. We've seen creators becoming more like businesses. Like if I said an influencer to you 5 years ago, you probably had a certain impression. You definitely don't think about them the way you do today, where like, wow, this could be a business. There's $1 million business that's scaling and growing and doing these things. You probably thought about someone that was goofing around on social and trying to become famous online. And now we're starting to see people see these folks as real businesses. There's large agencies that are just across the board that are focused exclusively on creators. There's brand partnerships and these creators that are becoming little mini businesses themselves. And so I think what we'll continue to see is this shift of like creators that become essentially the brands themselves. Like I think like the sort of creator has becomes an affiliate of these brands, and I think that will continue obviously for some time. But I think we'll start seeing more white label products, more, I know it's cliche, but the Mr. Beats of the world who I'm going to make more money if I create chocolate bars and create my own items and sell them directly and become a real business than I am if I'm just like selling someone else's, stuff with my content. And so I definitely think we're going to see a lot more of that for sure.
So, in other words, are you saying the importance of growing a personal brand is going to become even more important tomorrow than it is today?
Yeah, and it's also the people that are in the ecosystem around that to realize the people doing that are not should be taken very seriously. That like most of the large creators on our platform that are doing over, let's say, $30 million a year, they did that in a record amount of time. I personally witnessed maybe at least 20 brands that joined our platform with an idea and are now doing over $5 million a year within at least 18 months. Like these folks just figured out real fast. And the same technologies, the same agencies, the same services, the same banking relationships, everything that you would traditionally, you look at like a Visas and some of the banks and the different ecosystem partners, they're going after small businesses. They're trying to lock you in. QuickBooks wants to get every SMB when they first get started to use their software because they're going to lock you in. And traditionally, those folks haven't really looked at creators in the same way. And I think we're seeing that shift as well, where these creators are, again, someone's doing $5,000-$10,000 a month, you get them locked in on QuickBooks or some sort of partnership or some relationship now as an agency, whatever. And that person could be doing $2 million the next year. And I don't think we typically see that in the old school, like SMB, local business type model that we're used to.
You said there's like 20 people off the top of your head or 20 brands off the top of your head that within 18 months ended up making millions and millions of dollars. I want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. And you're talking that they are creators.
One of them, for example, was a nurse, and she was really good at, and so she basically developed a bunch of concepts around how to get your baby to transition your baby home from the hospital, how to help your baby transition to home, how to help your baby sleep. And that person, literally, I watched that person go on our platform. They were one person. They decided to take this content, create it in a video course, and they'll just scale over between 18 months. That person, their first month, they did a couple $1,000s. And by month 3, they're doing $30,000 a month. And then eventually they were hitting, I think they got up to about $3-4 million within that 18-month period. They had a team of 20 people. That's not like the norm. I'm not saying that that's the, like, everyone that comes on is going to do that. I'm certainly not saying that had anything to do with our software. She probably could have done a lot of that elsewhere as well. I'm not saying that we generated that, but what I am saying is that type of person should be taken a lot more seriously today than maybe in the past.
So How are you doing that with SamCart and doing some of that curating and creation process in terms of growing more SamCart subscribers and buyers?
We do our best. One of the areas where we can improve for sure is like we try to cross pollinate what our customers are doing sort of at an anonymous mass level. I would say that e-commerce is very trendy. Something like Apple Pay, there's always sort of that latest trend in terms of trying to optimize your checkout. I think for us where we've really helped folks is by saying like this is like real or this is not real. Sometimes we do that in our product decisions and people get mad. All of our biggest customers were furious with us because we refused to do crypto, a massive crypto purchase like workflow in our checkout. And we're looking at the data and we don't see like when we experiment with this or we test this out or we partner with our different friends and look at their kind of conversions, it's gimmicky and it's fun, but it's not actually what we're seeing conversion. So we're not going to invest in it as a product. Of course, today, no one really asks for it anymore or cares.
Awesome. Now, outside of just the software and your product internally, how has AI played a role in the way that your employees work and produce and so forth?
I would say that we are very open to our employees leveraging, but I would say that we haven't formalized AI within the organization yet. I mean, we're still small, so we're still not at the size and scale that we have to be super concerned about like formalizing what an AI strategy is in the organization. But I'd say that a lot of our employees find it easy to help customers with making those recommendations on sales, converting, sales conversions and pages. I know our marketing team leverages it to do some of the more like low hanging, like low tasks, like the blog posts and stuff. And I would say that the one place that we have really internally, but we're a little special on this, is that we actually purchased, going back to the conversation we had before about the success, the sales, like if we're just talking purely selfish, right? If we, as an e-commerce business where we generate money through subscriptions and through payment processing, the only way that we're going to make more money as a business is if our customers make more money. We truly are aligned to that. There's no way. If you don't make money on our platform, you're not going to stay. You're going to leave. And if you make more money on our platform, we get a bigger percentage of that through the bank. So at the end of the day, we truly, that 3% to 16% is truly something that we are focused on. So we actually bought a company called DropDeck. Now it's been rebranded Typeset. And Typeset is essentially this generative AI intelligence engine that takes written content and it converts it into smart, beautiful visual business content. So I've got a 5-page ebook on Google Docs and I want to copy it over and it's going to create my white paper. It's going to create my ebook. It's going to create a presentation that I'm going to present in my video or whatever. And so because we bought that for our customers, which are actually, it's a standalone solution now. People are using Typeset to generate that. And actually, it's been largely very successful. I think we got to like 7,000 customers in the first 6 months. And now we are going to start embedding that type of technology into the actual SamCart platform. So that's a project underway right now, which is we're taking that tech and giving it to our customers. But bringing back around to the original question, that product we use a lot internally. We don't really have like a formalized ChatGPT policy, except for the fact that I know everyone's using it. But what we do have is a pretty good set of folks who are generating better QBR decks and sales pitches and recommendations and content and white paper and blogs and stuff from this tech that we, happen to use a lot because we bought it.
Awesome. Now, this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would you say would be your biggest, best piece of advice for the CEOs and founders listening that want to take their business beyond seven figures?
I'm going to cheat and give you two because I think one is true but generic advice, which is it really is just determination. We've been doing SamCart for 7 years. I've wanted to quit at least 3 or 4 times. I think there's sort of 2 milestones that you have to overcome and you just have to grit it out until you get there. The first is your first sale. I think just getting started and getting to that first sale is the most important milestone. And then the second milestone is like scaling it to something that can provide like some sort of like full-time living. So putting that aside, because everyone says that, I think that maybe the less traditional advice would be, as we've scaled our business, I think we've learned, and that this was a false assumption, that we needed to scale ourselves. The common advice we got was, I know you're great at marketing and you're great at product, but you now need to be the CEO. You need to hire people to do that. You need to be able to scale. You need to be able to build a team. You need to be able to rely on others. And I think we just didn't find that to be the reality for us. We found that the more that we became something that we're not, because we were told that we have to scale beyond seven figures, the further and harder seven figures got from it. I think the advice I would give to the entrepreneur is whatever got you to where you are today. Like if you're sitting there with a great side hustle making $5,000 a month or $2,000 a month, and you did it because you were knocking doors and you were selling and you were getting on the phone call with customers, and then you just assume that because you're getting bigger now that you don't have to do that, and maybe you could hire that other person to do that. And at some point, obviously, you have to scale in general to just, you have to have more people to accomplish more things as just the nature of business. But I think the further away you get from your core competency and you think that you have to be this sort of administrative CEO or this hire other people and completely rely on them to do it, is maybe this false idea that we had along the way.
It does make sense. Well, and the key word there is core competency, because your core competency is what makes you awesome. And if some people at sales, then maybe they're better off as a founder to take a sales role than a CEO role. And hiring somebody else in the CEO role, they still have all the cards in their hand, right? They still own the business, but they realize that my core competency is in driving numbers. So I'm going to focus on this part of the business and let somebody else handle the other part, or whatever that might be. But you're right about like those unique abilities, core competencies and whatnot. There is a core difference, I think, between doing things that you're just excellent at and then doing things that are a core competency and unique at. I had a conversation with my chief of staff. We're out in California, and he says to me, he goes, "Charlie, you know what? You're not that smart." Whoa. Okay, buddy. Like, what is happening here? Where is this going? And he goes, "No, listen to me for a second. You're not that smart." And I'm like, "All right, now you're really going to have to help me out here because we can't leave on this note." And he goes, "No, what I'm trying to tell you is that you try to take on too much. And what I've realized is that 80% of the things that you're trying to hold control over, somebody else can do. And frankly, you're really good at it. But I think I could probably find somebody who could do this stuff even better than you on that 80%." And he's like, "And sometimes it's 95%. And I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "But the 5 to 20% that you bring to the table, nobody can do. Nobody else can do it but you. But that's why we're as good as we are. That's what makes us awesome. It's not the 80 to 95% of the stuff that you do. What makes us awesome is like 5 to 20%. And he goes, "Can you help me by you just staying in your lane of 5 to 20% and let me delegate and eliminate the rest?" And that actually created a huge leap in freedom, a huge leap in empowerment of the team. Everybody blossomed and everybody did a lot better. I didn't realize I was inadvertently preventing people from being as successful as they otherwise could be in the company because I was holding on too much. But when I let them go and let them do the stuff, they actually became so much smarter and so much better in their role. And it made me realize, wait a minute, you're right. My core competencies, like if I stay and just focus on these, we do a heck of a lot better than trying to do everything.
Even if they don't thrive and they just perform, the fact that you're like identifying that this 5 to 10% or 5 to 20% of what you're doing is the secret sauce and you're not focused on that. Like if your differentiation in business is X and you're not doing X because you're spending so much time doing everything else, even if the other stuff is only half as good, if your differentiation is 1,000 times better than the effort you were giving to it last month, you'll continue to thrive. And that's what we kind of saw as well.
I love that. Now, people want to learn more about you and the work that you do. Where do we send them?
Yeah, so they can just check out samcart.com if you want to just browse around. I mean, I think the quick sort of overview is you've heard from here that we're focused on making the checkout experience as smooth and fast and high converting as possible. And so if you don't want to juggle multiple platforms to sell your content or make it tough for customers to buy what they want, come check us out.
Awesome. Fantastic. That's Justin over at SamCart. I do recommend that you do check out SamCart. I've been hearing about SamCart for years and years and years. The company's done well, has a stellar reputation. So I do recommend that you check them out. And that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. For more tips, strategies, information for taking your business beyond seven figures, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gaudet. Thank you.